Good afternoon. This is Daniel here with Cops and Cons TV. Just want to welcome everyone into our live show. Today we're going to break down some of the most interesting and important cases in policing over the last week. Just want to wish everyone a happy Memorial Day holiday. Just like always, please make sure that you go ahead and like our channel, subscribe, and definitely send it to your friends and family. While I'm going through the show, definitely put in your comments if you agree with what I'm saying, or even more importantly, if you disagree, if you have a different take. And I know we're going to have some disagreements here on a couple of these cases that we're going through because they are a little bit controversial. So definitely put that into the chat so we can go back and forth. Again, my name is Daniel, and you can go ahead and follow me over at Police Law and News pretty much everywhere. So again, I want to welcome everyone in. Looks like we have a couple. We have Shaquille Oatmeal, Sergeant George, Officer Blue Gun. How's it going? Officer Blue Gun had an awesome video last week, and so definitely go and check out his channel. It was great. Seymour Cheeks. Nice. That is a great name as well. All right, so we're just going to get right into it. So this first case that I want to talk about, it's, I just as honest as I can be, we don't have a whole lot of information about it yet. We don't have body camera footage. We don't even have a statement from the police on this case. All we have is there was an individual who was shot by a police officer, and all we have is a statement from the family attorney. Now, we know that when this stuff happens, the information from the family attorney isn't always going to be correct. As generous as I could be, they're going to spin things in the light most favorable to the individual who was shot by police, because essentially they're going to try to get money from the city. I think we all know that, but this case doesn't look good. So this happened on 5/20 in Indianola, Mississippi. So what happened was there was a call for service to police officers at about 4:30 in the morning, and the person who called for police assistance was an 11-year-old kid named Adarian Murray. The reason that an 11-year-old, what should an 11-year-old be doing at 4:30 in the morning? It's not calling police officers. So what happened is his mother, and one of the mother has kids with a bunch of different guys. One of the fathers of one of her kids came over to the house sometime around 4 o'clock in the morning, and there was a domestic dispute between Adarian's mom and whoever this guy was. There was a domestic dispute. It seems like he was violent. During this domestic dispute, the mother asked Adarian to call for police officers, so he did that. He calls police officers. An officer arrives on scene. Now, the information that we're getting is that the officer arrived on scene, and pretty much as the officer got to the front of the house, the male in question, so the one who, maybe committed some kind of a crime, he left the scene through the back door of the house. So he was no longer on scene, which is what you want to happen. What the attorney says next happened is that then the police officer gave verbal commands or orders for everyone who was still inside the house to exit the residence. Well, this makes sense. This is a reasonable thing for a police officer to do. So people who are inside the house, such as Adarian's mother and brothers and sisters, they all started to exit the house. And for some reason, and this is where this makes absolutely no sense, for some reason, as Adarian exits his bedroom, the police officer shoots him one time in the chest. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. So what happened, he got shot in the chest, but luckily he survived. So he survived. He was actually standing with the attorney. So it seems like this 11-year-old Adarian, he is going to make a full recovery, but we don't have any other information right now. As you can imagine, that in Mississippi, where this occurred, there have been protests, and the protesters are asking for a couple of different things. They're asking for the body camera footage to be released, which pretty much, like I say every week, that's what we want. We want the body camera footage to be released for a couple different reasons. Not just because we have a body camera channel here and we want to play interesting body camera footage, but also this is how we get transparency from the government, controversial interactions between citizens and police. We want that information to be out there so we can see exactly what happened. Also, if you are the manager of a police department, or you're on the city council, or you're the mayor, or you own a business, what you want is the body camera footage to get out there. Basically get in front of this. Let's say this is not a lawful, not an objectively reasonable, out of policy, officer involved shooting. Let's say that's we don't know that for sure, but let's say that's the case. Getting out in front of it, that is absolutely what any city or police leader should do. So again, we don't know what happened, but I try to think about, so again, the family is asking for the body camera footage to be released, which is reasonable. They're also asking for the police officer to be fired and for the police officer to to be charged. So that's where I have a little bit of an issue. I'm not saying that this is a case where a police officer shouldn't be fired or shouldn't be charged. No, certainly when a police officer is involved in an officer-involved shooting with an unarmed 11-year-old for no real reason, if that's the case, yes, I could definitely see that being an instance or the type of case where a police officer is fired and also charged. But at this point, not only do we not have the body camera footage, we don't have a statement from the police officers, we don't have a statement from the officer's attorney, and the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, they just started their investigation. So essentially, we don't have any information. The idea that you are going to fire a police officer and charge them before any kind of investigation or body camera comes out seems a little silly. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I just try to think to myself, okay, in what situation would a police officer shoot an 11-year-old in this case? And I know that a lot of people have been commenting and stuff and said something to the effect of, well, maybe the police officer thought that he was the offender. Maybe the officer mistook this 11-year-old who's about 4'11". So it's not like he's a big 11-year-old. He's a regular size 11-year-old. He's not even 5 feet tall. So, but people were saying maybe the police officer mistook this 11-year-old for the offender. Okay, I can walk down that path with you. So let's make that assumption. Still, he's unarmed, and there's no reason to shoot someone who's unarmed, especially without giving any kind of command. So the best thing I can say is that this doesn't make any sense. And I'm going to speculate here a little bit because we don't know. And I'm really curious to see what everyone else thinks or what theories they might have or what some people's thoughts are. The only thing that I can think of is that as Adirian exited, either he surprised the officer thought that everybody had left the house already. Somehow he surprised the police officer, and this was a negligent discharge, and the police officer actually didn't mean to shoot an unarmed 11-year-old in the chest. So again, that's all I can think of. So obviously, we want the body camera footage to come out as soon as possible so we can look at it, put it up here, and go over it. But I'm really curious about everyone's thoughts and comments on this case. Let's see what we got. Sergeant George says, as any good police officer will tell you, domestic incidents are the most dangerous calls you can ever respond to because of the unknown element that is included. 100%. So Sergeant George, you're right. Anytime a police officer goes to a domestic violence call, of course, that is incredibly dangerous for that police officer. And I'm not sure about this department, but a lot of police departments, they have policies in place that say police officers don't take domestic disputes by themselves, especially if the offender is still on scene. That's a situation where two police officers go. So the little information that we have on this case, we don't have any other information about any other police officers being on scene. So I'd be really curious about that as well. Let's see. First time joining Cyber Ecstasy says, first time joining, loving it so far. Thank you so much. Steve Ladner says, do you think the family will ever call the police for help again? Probably not, Steve. That's a good question. I guess if their life is in danger, they might have to, but you can imagine a situation where if someone calls the police and the 11-year-old is either mistakenly or accidentally shot, that's a family who would not want to call police again. That's pretty reasonable. Sergeant George says, I think a much better question is what has this 11-year-old done that would warrant being shot at by police? Exactly. And that's why we need the body cam, Sergeant George. Yes, I'm not 100% sure what he did. Again, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Let's see. Officer Blue Gun says, unarmed also has been classified as people with objects in their hands that resemble firearms. Officer Blue Gun, that is such a good point, because a lot of times we say, or there's the perception out there that just because someone is unarmed, that they aren't a threat to a police officer. And I've covered this a couple times before, but Officer Blue Gun makes an excellent point that no, that's not the case. Because let's say you have someone who is a police officer. Let's say you have a 100-pound female police officer and a 200-pound male offender. Well, that police officer has a gun. So if someone is trying to punch a police officer in the face and trying to take their gun, yeah, you don't consider that person as being unarmed. Also, there could be something that looks like a gun. It could be a replica gun. There could be all kinds of things that happened where someone who is technically unarmed. I think they also consider people who are in vehicles driving towards police officers, trying to hit them with vehicles. I think they classify them as unarmed as well. So definitely saying unarmed, that absolutely, of course, does not mean that someone isn't a threat. threat, and we don't have that information here. So that's why I started this case off by saying we don't know a whole lot except from what the family attorney says, and we can assume that what the family attorney says is not going to be 100% correct. Any bad facts that might be involved in this case towards the family, obviously we're not going to hear that from the attorney. So that's why it is so important for the police department, the police union, the representatives for the officer, or the body cam footage to really get out and tell the truth if there is something more to this case. All right, let's see. Dan says that isn't a relevant question. Use of force perspective. I don't think anyone is disputing the 11-year-old should not have been shot. Dan, that's a good point. So Dan, what I'm trying to think of reasons. What possible reason would an 11-year-old be shot in a situation like this? And honestly, I can't really think of any information of why an 11-year-old, after they call police in a situation like this, would be shot, unless it was a mistake by the officer. It was a negligent discharge. I think that's the most likely thing that happened, but again, we don't really know. Shaquille says a lot of people refuse to call police for this very reason. Yeah, that's definitely something that happened. Sergeant George says, can you blame the family? No. So this is a case that we're going to be following for sure. As soon as the body camera video comes out, we're going to review it, go over it, and we're going to go ahead and talk about it. But this has been in the news the last couple days. And listen, this is an 11-year-old who called police, who was shot in the chest by an officer. This is absolutely the kind of case that the news should be covering on a national level. And we just don't have that much information yet. So I at least wanted to talk about it just a little bit and just kind of put thoughts and ideas and kind of have a discussion about it. Officer Bluegun says there are a few narrow examples of why an 11-year-old would be shot, but like Daniel's saying, those are much less likely given the circumstances. Yeah, exactly, Officer Bluegun. And we could all imagine a situation where, his mom is in danger because obviously he had to call the police, so there was some kind of danger. So does the 11-year-old have a pellet gun? Does the 11-year-old have an airsoft gun? Does the 11-year-old have something that he used reasonably to try to protect his mom, and he still had it in his hand when he exited the house? Is that possible? Absolutely, that's possible. Not saying that justifies it or makes this incident okay, but yes, that is absolutely a possibility. I just honestly think that's less likely than this is a negligent discharge by the police officer. However, as soon as we get the body cam footage or a statement from the police department, we'll know if that's correct. Also, yeah, it could be a maybe the kid armed himself with a kitchen knife. But absent that, I honestly can't think of any reasons why this would occur. So to me, it seems like this was likely a mistake, an accident, a negligent discharge by the police officer. So again, I appreciate everybody's comments on that because again, it's difficult because we don't have a whole lot of information. Let me just end this case with this. I did a video on TikTok earlier today. I think I put it on Instagram as well, and they got a decent amount of views. But several people made the comment, well, we don't have any information about it, why are you talking about it? Here's why I'm talking about the case, even though we don't have information. It's because people are protesting already. And again, the things they're asking for are body camera footage, which I'm good with, the officer to be fired, and the officer to be prosecuted. So if those are the only people talking about it, if those are the only voices saying the officer should be fired and prosecuted before we know any of the facts of what happened, I'm going to say no. We all have to talk about the case and say, hey, at this point, this is what we know, this is what the possibilities are, and at least to have conversations with people who immediately say the officer has to be fired and has to be prosecuted. So at least I think we should be talking about the case to be the opposition to that. Maybe the voice of reason, the little center of calm in cases like this. All right, so the next case that I want to talk about, and I covered this case earlier this week on one of my channels. So this occurred in Fremont, California. That's kind of like in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it included several different police agencies all trying to work together at the same time, which did lead to a little bit of confusion. And this is from April 13th of 23. So I'm not sure if the body camera footage just came out, but I just saw the body camera footage this week. And this is one of those cases where I watched the body camera footage. I didn't listen to any commentary. So what I like to do with cases, I like to watch the body camera footage. I don't want to hear what anyone else has to say about the case. I want to make my own judgments because I don't want to listen to Donut Operator or Failure to Stop or any of these other really great channels and then watch the body camera footage, because a lot of times they make really good points, and I think that my judgment is going to be clouded by what they say. So I like to watch the body camera footage, kind of come to my own opinion, and then I listen to the other channels to see what they have to say about it as well. So this was a case where I watched the body camera footage in regular speed, and after I saw the body camera footage, I said, the cop messed up. This is not a lawful, objectively reasonable officer-involved shooting. But the body camera footage that was provided by the police department also had it in slow motion. As soon as I saw it in slow motion, I thought that completely changed it, because my human eye, the eye wasn't able to pick up what actually happened in real time, and I'm going to tell you about it. So again, this happened on April 13th of 2023, Fremont, California, kind of in the Bay Area, and this was a case where the individual who was shot and killed by police officers was a 19-year-old named Elmer Lopez Castaneda. So how all this started is this was a call for service. A father called in that his son was carjacked at knife point. So he called in that the car was stolen at knife point. That's a serious violent felony. Give a description of the vehicle, all of those things. Well, a lot of people, so my wife's cousin actually had his car stolen, had his truck stolen in Sioux Falls, South Dakota earlier this week. So if you're in the Sioux Falls area, definitely hit me up. He's trying to find the stolen pickup truck. But so a lot of times when people have stolen cars, the police don't recover them quickly. However, the police actually did. Not long after this was called in as a stolen vehicle, carjacked at knife point, police officers actually found the vehicle. That's great. Then they did what they should. They approached the vehicle and they realized that the vehicle was still occupied. So the suspects, the potential offenders, were still in the vehicle. There were two of them, one in the driver's seat, one in the passenger seat. Mr. Lopez, the one who was shot by police officers, he was in the driver's seat. So police officers did what they should. They did a high-risk felony stop. Now, we've all seen this before. Sergeant George and Officer Bluegun, everyone knows what a felony stop is. What that is, it never looks like it does in the police academy where it's perfect. Essentially, you have a car sitting and you have a row of cars, a row of police cars. Usually, they try to park behind each other, maybe two, and they essentially open their doors of their vehicle to have some kind of cover or concealment. And what they do is they draw out their guns, lethal and less lethal, and they give commands for the occupants of the vehicle to walk back towards them, get everyone in handcuffs. Then they go up and search the car. It's called a felony stop. This is what police officers should do when you're taking people who are suspected of felonies, especially violent felonies, into custody. So police officers did a felony stop. Why I said earlier that there was a little bit of confusion, because there was more than one police department there. So, a lot of times if it's the same police department, you go, okay, whichever officer is the main one who did the traffic stop directly behind the car, the one who's by the driver's seat, that is the officer who is in charge of PAs, given the public address announcements, essentially giving the commands to the people in the car, and you have that set. But you can imagine if you have different police departments, maybe the lead police agency, maybe that's not the one who actually stopped the car. So then who's in charge of the felony stop? So and when this first started, the body camera footage shows that multiple different police officers were giving orders. Now, the same kind of orders, show us your hands, all these reasonable orders, but they were coming from a bunch of different officers. And when I saw that, I thought, oh, this is going to go to shit. This is all fucked up, because they got multiple people giving orders. However, very quickly into it, before either of the occupants exited the vehicle, one of the police officers on scene made a command decision and said, you give the orders, which is exactly what needed to happen. So they designated one person to give the orders, and that's what happened, which was a good thing. So the police officer gave orders to Mr. Lopez, who was sitting in the driver's seat of the vehicle. He gave him simple, reasonable orders, such as exit the vehicle, keep your hands in the air. Once Mr. Lopez was out of the vehicle, not facing towards police officers, the officer gave him the command to walk back towards the officer. This is exactly what should happen. However, while he was walking back towards the police officer, the officer noticed that there appeared to be a handgun in his waistband. It was at that point that the police officer yelled gun. He yelled it pretty loud. The reason that he yelled that, and this is a good thing, is basically to alert all of the other police officers there on scene that Mr. Lopez had a gun somewhere in his waistband. Maybe the officers were at different angles and couldn't see what he was seeing, or didn't know where it was, but just the idea that the officer yells gun kind of puts everybody on high alert to let them know that, hey, this individual has a weapon. That's a good thing for police officers to know. So once he yelled gun, now here's what the officer did. Again, my specialization isn't tactics. I've mentioned that before, but reasonable, regular patrol tactics, to me it seems something strange happened here with the instructions, and I'm really curious about what some of the other people's thoughts are on this. So when the officer yelled gun, he then changes commands, because the commands before were walk back towards us, keep your hands in the air. As soon as he yelled gun, he changed it. He then said, get down on your knees. To me, that seems strange. So the individual, Mr. Lopez, he was still closer to his driver's side door than he was to being in a place where the police officers were going to place him in handcuffs, maybe halfway in between the police car and the offender vehicle. So he's still maybe kind of by the front hood of the car. So he tells Mr. Lopez to get down on his knees. Now, to me, that's strange. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So here you have someone with a gun. Shouldn't you give the same commands? Hey, keep your hands in the air, keep walking back. Don't reach down, things like that. But instead of doing that, he tells him to get down to his knees. To me, that's strange, because if you have someone down on their knees, if they have a gun in their waistband, it only makes it more difficult for you and the other officers to see where that gun is, and you still have a passenger in the car. So now what are you going to do if the individual has a gun? Now you're going to run up, put him in handcuffs, put yourself even more in an unsafe position because you have someone still in the passenger seat that you haven't cleared. So to me, this doesn't make any sense. Now I know that every police officer is trained, and you go through this, and then sometimes something happens, and even trained police officers make mistakes in the moment. Okay, that doesn't mean the officer's a bad person. Again, just like I said last week, making a tactical error, it's not good, but it doesn't equate to committing a felony. Okay, it's not the same thing. Everybody makes mistakes. This is why training and education is so important for police officers. But again, please put in the comments. Let me know if you think that it was strange for the officer to kind of change the commands at that point. So he told him to get down to his knees. Well, what Mr. Lopez does is he doesn't start to go on his knees. Again, his hands were raised in the air. What he did is he dropped his hands toward his waistline, and at that point, when he dropped his hands towards his waistline, he actually grabbed the handgun in his waistband. And when he grabbed the handgun that was in his waistband, it was at that point that multiple police officers did fire their weapons. He did sustain fatal injuries. And I try to look at it from the position of Mr. Lopez. Like, what was he trying to do? He was a 19-year-old kid. What he had wasn't actually a real firearm. It was an airsoft gun, but it was metallic, and it was a replica of a Beretta. So it was a replica. It was designed to look like a real firearm. It looked like a real firearm. I put pictures of it up on my TikTok and Instagram. So it looked like a real firearm. So it's reasonable for the police officer to think it's a real firearm. But from the perspective of Mr. Lopez, here you are, you're a 19-year-old kid, you're being given orders by police officers, you're in a stolen car, you fucked up. You have an airsoft gun. So it isn't like it's a .45 caliber gun where you're like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try to kill police officers today, because it's an airsoft gun. You couldn't use it to kill police officers even if you wanted to. So the idea that he's going to reach for it and try to take it out doesn't make any sense if he's trying to harm police officers. It doesn't make any sense. So I think, well, what was Mr. Lopez trying to do? Could this be in the category of like a fucked up game of Simon Says, where it's like, again, not only do police officers get stressed out in the moment and make mistakes, but individuals get stressed out and make mistakes. So he was in a position where, okay, I have my arms raised, I'm walking back towards the cops, then they yell gun, and they start giving me different commands, and maybe he tried to put his hands down, and then he was going to go down to his knees, maybe because the officer yelled gun, that he wanted to show the officers it wasn't real, so he was going to grab it and then throw it. Who knows? Either way, he did put his hand on the gun, and he started to take the gun out of his waistband. It's at that point that the shots were fired. So when you watch the body camera video, it doesn't look like that. It doesn't look like he touches the gun at all, which is why initially I thought, like, what are these cops doing? But then when I watched it slow down, yeah, you can clearly see him reach for the gun, touch the gun actually starts to come out before he shot. So he did sustain fatal injuries. I'm really curious to see what other people think about this case. In my opinion, just look at just what we know. So obviously we have comments from the family attorney saying that, well, it was an airsoft gun and the police officer shouldn't have shot him. Well, again, this is what I said about the first case. This is what the family attorney has to say. We have to take it with a grain of salt. We can't take it all that seriously because the attorney's only only going to say things that are in the light most favorable to their client. If they said anything other than that, they really wouldn't be doing their job as an attorney representing that family. So I get them saying it, but we have to look at it. The police officer doesn't know it's an airsoft gun. Here you have someone who just committed a felony. While they're walking back to your vehicle, they start to reach for what very reasonably, what anyone would think is a gun. Yeah, is it reasonable that a police officer wouldn't want an individual in the situation to have possession of what looks like a firearm? Of course, that's reasonable. So to me, this clearly looks like an objectively reasonable, lawful, within police department policy, officer-involved shooting. Again, not sure about that one command. And again, that's not illegal to give a bad command. But the idea to change it from walk back towards me to get down on your knees, to me, that strikes me as strange. I'm curious to see what other people think. Let's see. Sergeant George says, Fremont, the city I grew up in. But anyways, onto the body cam video. Usually when it comes to felony stops like this one, it's almost always for Fourth Amendment purposes. Yeah, absolutely. Officer Blue Gun, he should have addressed the gun by telling the suspect, do not reach for anything. I see the gun in your waistband. If you reach for it, you will be shot. Then carry on with bringing him back to you. Officer Blue Gun, 100%. So a lot of times when I do these breakdowns, look at these cases, me and Officer Blue Gun are just about right there. Officer Blue Gun, that's a 100% exactly it. Why change course? Like I don't understand. Even from again, I never went through SWAT school. I've admitted that before. I was never on the SWAT team. But 10 years on patrol, basic patrol tactics. Felony stops are what regular patrol cops do. So again, it doesn't make any sense to now the guy has a gun in the waistband. The idea of making it so we no longer want him to back up towards us with his hands in the air. We want him to get down to his knees. Again, it makes him harder to see. It makes the gun harder to see. From a tactical standpoint, I don't understand why the officer would do that. So my guess is it was a stressful situation. The officer made a mistake. Again, I'm curious to see. Maybe there is some training out there that I don't know of. So that's why I'm asking. Steve Ladner says, I agree. Listen, if I say something and if Steve Ladner agrees with it, I'm on the right track, because Steve usually doesn't agree with me, which is why I always appreciate his commentary. Sergeant George says, one thing they always teach you in the academy, keep your eyes on the suspect's hands, because even though some of them aren't holding anything, the hands are the ones that will kill you. Sergeant George, 100% correct. And the officer in this case, they were watching the hands. They were watching the hands more than I was able to watch what was going on the body camera video, because as soon as he touched the gun and the gun started to come out of the waistband, that's when they fired their weapons. Officer Blue Gun says, officer mindset was wrong. High risk stop. Don't be surprised by a firearm being present. Act as if a person is armed. 100%. Let's see. Sergeant George says to the family attorney, even though the suspect had an airsoft gun, the heat of the moment for those in law enforcement, it's hard to tell the difference. Yeah, absolutely. Even when I think on TikTok and Instagram, I posted a picture of the gun during the breakdown that I did, and if you look at the picture of it, you can't tell it's an airsoft gun. I mean, it looks like a Beretta handgun. Dan says high risk stops, decentralized. Why are we renaming everything? You know what? I don't know. So Dan, what did you call it? So I was always trained that it's called a felony stop. So to me, since when I went to the police academy in 2005 up until today, at least where I'm from, it's called a felony stop. That's what we call it. I have noticed maybe over the last 5 years that other police officers and other police agencies call it a high-risk stop. So the only reason I said, and maybe you call it high-risk stop and you think it's strange for me to call it a felony stop. I don't know. But to me, felony stop is what it's called. High-risk stop is what other people call it. I use both terms because I'm not sure what people use. So Dan, I'm really curious. What do you use in your area? What's the normal thing? Officer Blue Gun says, why is this dude rolling with a replica firearm? I don't know. And listen, Officer Blue Gun, if you're gonna in this situation, if you're gonna go ahead and reach for that, what you do is you reach for it and you put it and you leave it in the car before you even exit the car. That's when you do it. Certainly not as you're walking out. Let's see. Dan says, yeah, felony stop is what I've always heard. Yeah, Dan, yeah, me too. I've always called it a felony stop. No one where I'm from calls it a high risk stop. But that's typically it. Let's see. We have any other questions on that? Let's see. California laws. He has some. Let's see. Hang on. Yeah, there's some cancer-causing plastic since it's a fake gun, so it's got to be metallic. Let's see. We have any other questions about that? Yeah, no, there absolutely is reason for a felony stop. This is a good time to do a. This is definitely a good time to do a felony stop. And yeah, like I said, to me, this looks like a lawful, reasonable, justified officer-involved shooting. Obviously, the family's always going to complain. We never want a 19-year-old to get killed by a police officer. But this is a situation. I'm not sure what the police officers were supposed to do once he reached for that gun. So the next case, it's not really a case. It's more of a commentary on a case that's going on. So Christopher Neely. So if you're following like I am, so I've said before that this Jordan Neely, Daniel Penny case in New York City in the subway, to me, this is one of those cases that is like almost is going to like define a culture, kind of like the George Floyd case, kind of like Breonna Taylor. Like this is one, to me, this is one of those huge cases. And I think it is, when it comes to the culture, I think it is that important. I really think it talks about good versus evil. What should reasonable people do when someone is being threatened and there's no police officers present? Do you walk away or do you step in? That is such a basic question that we have to get answered in our society. And so I've really been following this Daniel Penny, Jordan Neely case, and I've talked about it. But the self-appointed spokesperson for the Neely family has been Jordan Neely's uncle, a man named Christopher Neely. So Christopher Neely, if you've been following this case at all, there really, in New York City, there hasn't been a camera that he hasn't jumped in front of and waved his hand to talk about how he's the family spokesperson. He's been all over the news. He's been on CNN, MSNBC, every single news channel. Christopher Neely, he's been the de facto spokesperson for the family. Well, something interesting happened to Christopher Neely, and he's Jordan Neely's uncle. Something interesting happened to him this weekend. So last week, he put out a statement, and in his statement, he said that he doesn't want Daniel Penny to be offered a plea deal. He said he has to be taught that what he did was wrong. So when you hear that, you think, oh, wow, maybe this is a real upstanding guy. He's a law-abiding citizen. Like, this is a real law and order person. Like, he wants Daniel Penny to go to trial. He truly believes in right and wrong. Well, that's not true, and I think a lot of us knew that wasn't true. A couple days ago, Christopher Neely was arrested for pickpocketing. He was found with stolen credit cards and weapons. A little bit of a search of his history found that he's been arrested over 70 times. At the time of his arrest this past week, he also fought with police officers. He was uncooperative, so he was charged with resisting arrest. He also had 2 active warrants for his arrest from other involved cases. So it's one of those things. Okay, so no plea deal because you want criminals to be taught a lesson. It's an interesting principle. Let's see if it applies here, because it certainly didn't apply to the 70 other times that he was arrested. Imagine being a 40-year-old man arrested 70 times. That's absolutely insane. He's a career criminal, and so you got it. No plea deals for criminals. I'm down with that. Officer Blue Gun says how many warrants he got. He has 2 warrants. So my question is, when he was doing all these media interviews, did the police officers there know that he had warrants? What would be interesting is, here he is jumping in front of the cameras, basically talking shit about Daniel Penny, and the police officer are like, who the fuck is this guy? And they run his name and they find out he has warrants, so that they put the pickpocketing team, because they have to in New York City, they put the pickpocketing team after him in New York City. Catch him in the act. If that, I don't believe in karma, but if that's the kind of thing that happened, that's just about perfect. Miguel says, have you talked about the U-Haul police shooting video? I don't think so, Miguel. I haven't, unless it's a case that I have that I in my head, I call it something else. Miguel, could you put in the city that it occurred in, or the officer or the individual involved? And I'll take a look at it, and maybe we'll cover it this week. Thank you for the tip, because that doesn't seem like something I did. Let's see. Sergeant George says, note to self, if you're sharing a train car with a 40-year-old who's been in trouble 100 times, it's probably time to ask for another place to sit. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so this other case that I want to talk about that I think is important. It's the last case that I'm gonna cover today, and I did. So this case happened almost a year ago. I did talk about it after it happened, but we do have some updates. It really hasn't been in the news much, at least I think on a local level in Colorado. This has been in the news, but I haven't haven't seen too many national stories about it in the last year or so, but there is a pretty big update on it about what happened. So this is a case that happened June 11th of last year, 2022, in Clear Creek County, Colorado. So where this is, it's a little bit west of Denver, 30-40 miles west of Denver, near a town called Idaho Springs. Essentially, if you're in Denver and you want to go to Breckenridge, you drive down the highway, you're going to pass Idaho Springs. The individual who was involved with the police was a 22-year-old named Christian Glass. So what happened in this case is Christian Glass, he has some type of a mental illness. We don't know exactly what, but it's fair to say there's something going on, right? So what happened to Christian Glass is he was actually rock hunting, collecting. He was kind of like a kid who liked geology. So he did have some weapons in the car. He had a rock, he had this knife, and this other little hammer. But really, they were tools to help him with his geology collecting rock. So while he was driving home at night, he crashed his car. Somehow he crashed his car kind of on the side of the highway, and he called for police assistance. That's a reasonable thing to do. Hey, my car is crashed. It's not drivable. I'm going to need police. I need a tow truck. I need some help. So police officers from Clear Creek County, deputies from Clear Creek County, Colorado, they went on scene. Even before they got on scene, the police officers and dispatch knew that something was a little off, because most people would call and say, hey, I'm sorry to bug. Here I am on this mile marker. I crashed my car. Can I get some help out here, please? And I'll wait. This is my cell phone number. Well, what Christian Glass started to say to the dispatcher is that he started to say how he was afraid of skinwalkers. He starts telling the dispatcher that he was afraid that he was being followed. So he seemed paranoid. That's why I said that there's something else going on when you make a call for service like this and you're telling the dispatcher that you're afraid of being followed and that you're afraid of skinwalkers. Now, if you're afraid of skinwalkers, I'm good with it. Weird thing to tell a dispatcher in a situation like this. So while he's waiting for police officers to get on scene, he's on the phone with dispatch for 20 minutes or so. Finally, officers get on scene, and even though he called for police officers, they get there, and he refuses to exit the vehicle. At first, the police officers are pretty reasonable. They introduce themselves. They say, hey, we're going to help you out. We can get you a tow truck. It's all on body camera footage, and the police officers are pretty reasonable with him, and obviously they ask him to exit the vehicle. That's a normal thing to do. He refuses. He refuses to get out of the vehicle. Then they start to think, okay, well, maybe this isn't just someone who crashed needs help. Maybe he's drunk. And again, it's nighttime. It's a single vehicle car crash. And he's acting weird. Can we say he's acting weird? He's acting strange. It's not unreasonable for an officer to think, okay, maybe we have a drunk driver situation. So now it goes from, hey, can you please exit the vehicle, to, hey, this is an investigation. You need to exit the vehicle. So the police officers amped it up to, hey, this is a criminal investigation, and it was reasonable to do that. And Christian refuses to exit the vehicle. They bring in people from different police departments, trying to get him out of the vehicle. At one point, he says, because talking to dispatch, the officers know he has a knife, he has this little hammer. So the officers ask him about it. And at one point, Christian offers. He says, "Hey, yeah, I have these things inside the car. I'll throw them out the window." So Christian offers to throw the weapons out of the window on the passenger side, and to basically show I'm not a threat. For some reason, the officers tell him not to. And again, that doesn't make any sense. The only thing I can think of is that the officers didn't want him to grab for those things and then exit the car, because then if something happened, people would be able to say, you told him to pick those objects up. So I guess I'm trying to think about it a couple steps down, but here you have a kid in a car who has a couple I guess they could be weapons, but he has these things that could be seen as weapons. He's offering to throw them out of the vehicle. Fucking let him throw them out of the vehicle. This doesn't make any sense. Let him throw them out of the car, especially if he tells you which window he's going to do it out of. Let him do it. To me, that makes the most sense. For whatever reason, they tell him not to. So he's in the car, and this goes on. They bring in a couple different officers to try to get him out of the car. And during this, they kind of realize, okay, we don't think this is a DWI investigation or a drunk driver. This seems like a kid who's having some kind of a mental health issue. Colorado State Police actually get on scene, and Colorado State Police, they're actually the only ones who make some kind of a reasonable decision, because Colorado State Police, they basically say he hasn't committed a crime, he's not suicidal, he's not homicidal. We shouldn't force contact. He doesn't want contact with cops. He doesn't want to exit the car. He's saying he doesn't want help. We're out of here. We're out of here. We're not getting involved in this. So Colorado State Police leave, which again, I think was the right decision to do. Unfortunately, the county and some of the other police departments who run didn't do that, and they wanted to force contact. So they have contact with Christian. They do some the basic, crisis intervention. They do some during 70 minutes with him, trying to get him out of the car. Again, he's not homicidal, not suicidal, and he hasn't committed a crime. To me, there's no reason to force contact. That's a time where a police officer should say, hey, can I call your parents? Can I call your boyfriend? Can I call your girlfriend? Do you have a friend I can call? Do you want me to call you an Uber? Hey, listen, here's some seems like you're having a bad day. Here's some resources. I'm going to leave them on the hood of your car. And if you need us, please call us back. Otherwise, have a good night. It seems like that's what police officers and police departments should do when there's no legal reason to take someone in for a mental health evaluation and there's no crime that's been committed. That's not a police issue. Offer help, but if help is rejected, stop contact. This idea of using force to force contact for no lawful objective to me is nuts. But that's what the police officers do after about 70 minutes. They come up with a plan that they're going to extract him from the vehicle. Here's the plan. One officer, and again, I've never seen this besides the video that I covered last week where the officer jumped on the hood of the car and the car was driving. The only other time I've seen a police officer jump purposely on the hood of a car, and at least this was a car that was stopped and disabled so it couldn't drive away. But this is the only other time I saw a police officer jump on the hood of the car. So here's what happened. One police officer jumps on the hood of the car, and through the front windshield, he's pointing a gun at Mr. Glass. On the passenger side, they use either a baton or a beanbag shotgun, and they break out the passenger side window. So now they have no passenger side window. They have lethal coverage on the front. Christian is in there with his little knife and his rock hammer that he had previously said he would throw out of the car, and they wouldn't let him do it. So at that point, what they try to do is they try to use force to get him out of the car because he's by himself in the car. He's not a threat to anyone at this point. They use force to try to get him out of the car. What they do is they do fire the beanbag shotgun at him, and they utilize a taser. Well, you can imagine at that point someone who might be having some mental health issues. I mean, obviously he's not getting out of the car for the police officers. He's making heart symbols with his hands. Something isn't right. This doesn't make any sense. So what he starts to do is when he's getting shot with these less lethal munitions, that yes, they're less lethal, but they hurt. Getting tased isn't fun. Getting shot with a beanbag shotgun isn't any fun. So he does pick up the knife, still in the driver's seat of the car, and he kind of starts to wiggle and writhe in pain, just like anyone would in a situation like that. Then for some reason, a police officer who was at the front, and I should say at this point, the driver's side window was also down. At this point, a police officer who is at the front driver's seat, for some reason, gets really close to the front driver's seat, pretty much in striking distance of Christian with his knife, because he put himself in that position. Once the officer got too close to Christian and Christian had the knife and waving it around, it was at that point that police officers fired their weapons. Christian was shot and killed. I said at the time, when this first came out, as soon as I saw the body camera video, that this is absolutely insane, that this is a tactical nightmare. It didn't make any sense. I said at the time, this is not only going to be a civil case, but this shooting is not objectively reasonable. These officers are going to be charged. I said this last year after this case came out. Well, since then, and this week, there was a $19 million settlement from not only the Clear Creek County Sheriff's Office, but also a couple other police agencies who were here on scene. Clear Creek has the biggest. I think they're paying $10 million, and then $9 million is from the other couple police departments who were there on scene. $19 million settlement. Also, the Clear Creek County Sheriff's Office has to establish a crisis intervention team and training, which I think makes sense. And also, 2 police officers are charged. 2 officers who fired their weapons, they are charged. One is charged with negligent homicide. One is charged with second-degree murder, and one is charged with negligent homicide and reckless endangerment, and the other officer is charged with second-degree murder, official misconduct, and reckless endangerment. The sheriff of Clear Creek County, Rick Elber, said in a statement that the shooting, the sheriff said that after an independent investigation, that the shooting was not consistent with that of a reasonable officer. So independent use of force investigation, criminal investigation, found that this shooting was not lawful, was not within policy. I think that's correct. I don't see how this was a lawful shooting. To me, how they even got there doesn't make a whole lot of sense. This was the biggest police settlement in the history of the state of Colorado. If you remember the Elijah McClain case from Aurora, Colorado, that one settled for $15 million. I think within the last year, this is $4 million more than that $19 million. So curious to see what other people have to say. Sergeant George says, says, fact that Christian Glass thought he was still in Roswell, New Mexico when he was mentioning the UFO makes you wonder how bad his mental health issue was. Agree 100%, George. No, there was definitely mental health issues going on. Yeah, again, he was talking about UFOs and skinwalkers. He thought he was in Roswell. So I get it. And see, the thing is, what people have to understand, I think Sergeant George is probably going to agree with me, but tell me if you think I'm wrong. Police officers in this situation, they weren't out to hurt anybody. They weren't trying to make a mistake. No police officer on scene said, you know what we're going to do? This 19-year-old, or this, was he 22? This 22-year-old kid who's having mental health problems, we're going to try to fuck him up. We're really going to get him today. No. The reason that they stayed on scene when they had no reason to arrest him, no real reason for a mental health evaluation, is because they honestly wanted to help. They honestly thought that this was the best thing to do, because if they left him alone in the mental state that he was in, that something bad could happen. And that's what they were trying to avoid. Did they go about it the right way? No. But we all know what the intention from the police officers were, and it wasn't to do anything bad. I mean, it just wasn't. But that's why it is so important for police departments and police leaders to not only have policy but training to deal with situations like this, because there are so many times where you don't have a lawful reason to arrest and you don't have enough, meaning that they're not threatening themselves or they're not threatening other people, so you have no reason to take them for an involuntary mental health evaluation, but you have someone who's basically in the throes of mental illness. That's difficult. What do you do for police officers? If they had a crisis intervention training, if they had a crisis intervention team, probably what would have happened is that trained individual would have said, we got to walk away. There's nothing that we can do here. Here's the resources. You know what? We have his information. We looked him up. We actually found his dad's number. We found his mom's number. We called his mom. We said, hey, listen, we're out here with Christian. This is what he's doing. Do you guys have any information for us? Is there anything we can do to help? Is there any doctor we could put him in touch with? Or this is where he is. If you guys want to come out and help, like, these are the things that police officers need to do. And it may not be inherently known, but this is the type of training that police departments need to give their officers before there's another Christian Glass situation. Yeah, Officer Blue Gun agrees that was a bad shoot. I agree 100%. Sixth Sense says, I remember the video of Christian Glass. Yeah, it was pretty terrible, Sixth Sense. Let's see. Miguel says, I'm surprised tranquilizers aren't part of police tools by now. So they're Miguel, that's an interesting question. So they're typically, tranquilizers pretty much aren't. When it comes to less lethal munitions from police officers, we have taser, we have beanbag shotgun. There is that thing. It's kind of new and cool for certain situations. Bowler wrap, but if police officers have to tranquilize someone, that's something that they typically call out medics for, and it's usually a medical decision made and not a police officer decision, and I'll be honest, I think that's the correct place. I don't think police officers, no matter how much training they have, should be doing any kind of tranquilizer. I think that's a bad idea. Call out the medical professionals if that needs to occur. Sixth Sense, let's see, Dan says, finally a settlement for a victim who was actually wronged and not just a political statement with taxpayer money. Dan, that's an excellent comment. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think Christian Glass and his family were true victims. I think the police officers messed up when it comes to training, policy, and I think that the two officers violated the law. So, I agree 100%, which is why I wanted to cover this case after the settlement. I think it's important to talk about cases like this because, like I've said, when police officers do a good job, like that case in Farmington, New Mexico I talked about last week, when police officers do a good job, there's good police work, we need to highlight it. Absolutely. But the same thing is for when there's bad police work. When police officers don't do what they should, when they violate the law, when they follow a bad policy, we need to talk about that almost as much. That is almost as important. I could even make an argument it's more important that we need to talk about when police officers don't do what they should, because the goal in all of this is to try to make it so that there's less violence between citizens and police. That's what we want. That's what the goal is. And talking about these cases where things don't go right, not pushing it under the rug, but talking about and addressing those cases and trying to think of not just saying a police officer did this, the police officer is racist, which it wasn't a thing in the Christian Glass case because it was white cops and a white Mr. Glass was white. But instead of just saying, well, the cops are bad, cops are tyrants, all police are bad. Instead of saying that criticism isn't very interesting. What's interesting is saying, hey, here's where the police officers messed up. Here's the training. Here's the policy. Here's what wasn't followed. Here's what we can do to fix it. That's what I think the interesting conversation is. And a lot of people who watch this show, I think they also think that's where the interesting and honest and objective conversation is. Let's see. No other comments on that particular case. Well, that's going to be it. Those are the cases that I want to talk about today. So That U-Haul case, I know Officer Blue Gun commented on it as well. That's something that I will look into this week. And just like I do every week, I do read the comments throughout the week. So even if you're watching this live stream on Tuesday or Wednesday or in the middle of your enjoying your Memorial Day weekend, even if you put a comment in there, a lot of times I will get back to it and address it. And also, I think it's important to talk about if there are any other cases like this U-Haul case that maybe I'm not aware of or I missed, which definitely happens. It's definitely something to put in the chat so I can go ahead and get to it. Before we take off for the day, I absolutely want to thank the men and women who died for this country. They are a huge help when it comes to America being a great country and defending our great nation. So definitely want to put that out there. Definitely want to thank everybody for being part of our show today. Again, please go ahead and follow our channel, share it with your friends and family, and you can go ahead and follow me over at Police Law News. Pretty much everywhere. I hope everyone has a great and safe weekend, and thank you so much for your interesting questions and comments.